Good morning, Eugene. How are you?
Morning, Jana. I'm great. How are you today?
Great. Today we're going to talk about the things that people hear and see, how much to trust, what not to trust, and examples like Wikipedia. So you've done a deep dive into this to help people see that what's put in front of their eyes is really a one-side narrative. So I'll turn it over to you to talk about the corruption of Wikipedia.
Yeah, thanks, Jana. So I guess if you've been following Wikipedia for the last few years, and particularly on controversial issues, you'll probably have noticed there's something wrong. Like there's a bit of a bias going on there. Now we all refer to it. I refer to Wikipedia an awful lot, and most of us do. Now the other thing I think that's important here is that Wikipedia feeds Google. So when you do a Google search, the little piece that you see in the top left-hand corner, which will usually be a little synopsis, that comes from Wikipedia. And the other thing it feeds is the AIs, or most of them, will also draw from Wikipedia. And hence, if there's a corruption in Wikipedia, it follows through. You'll get it on Google and you'll get it in your AI. So it's actually quite serious because that could, children at school, for example, would be using Wikipedia to do research, for example, right? And they'd look up various topics. And if those topics happen to be controversial ones where there's debate and a contention on them, they'll only get one view from Wikipedia, which will be a hard left view or a woke view, if you want to call it that. But it'll be a technocratic narrative view of the world that they'll get. Okay, so we're going to take a step through it here. We'll have the links in the description. So just a reminder to everybody that for any of our videos, we're not just talking about our own opinions here. So everything we back it up with links in our video description on YouTube. So if you're watching this on another platform, you probably have to go to the original source on YouTube and take the links and take a look at them yourself.
I can just add for everyone listening, please do like, comment, subscribe, and share because we are not Wokepedia. We do back it up with evidence, and that's why we live in the world of shadow banning.
Yeah, correct. And if people have additional information or people have something that might be contradicting what we're saying, don't just put a comment. Please put a link in to some information that might be of help to us, and we'll follow it up. We're only interested in the objective truth, and if we don't have it, well, we want to find it. So that's our goal. We're not trying to present a narrative. We're trying to present what is real and what's actually happening right now. And what's happening in Wikipedia right now is very real, and we'll give you a real tangible example in a few minutes. So this article talks about the serious bias problem, and it's getting worse, and it has been getting worse. I've certainly seen it, and I've seen it on the AIs as well. AIs will refuse to comment on certain topics. They won't even give you a response on them. They'll lock up, actually. Like they'll kind of get upset and they won't talk to you anymore. That's happened to me on a number of times with contentious issues when you ask the question of an AI. So that's the problem. So you can see it, the contended areas, things like American politics, Donald Trump, for example, the whole Palestinian thing, anything related to COVID, gender identity, racism, the United Nations SDGs, global governance, any of these topics. The AIs and Wikipedia will the AIs mightn't give you any response at all, or they're just going to give you, you'll see the response in a minute for one example. It won't be a proper response. So you've got to be aware of that. So let's kind of move on and get into it, I guess, in a little bit more detail. So this is from the one of the co-founders of Wikipedia, a guy called Larry Sanger. So he was there at the very start. Wikipedia was a fantastic project, a community-based project, people contributing information, etc. And everybody got on board with it. And absolutely, we all loved it. And Larry Sanger, that was his kind of goal, this kind of, say, community-fed resource. But unfortunately, it's been taken over and corrupted. So people are now using it as a source of propaganda. So that's the trouble. Like so many things in our life that has happened. So he talks about it here. He talks about it's all that the perspective is a globalist perspective. It's from leftist academics. It's all about a progressive perspective, if you want to call it that, or a woke is what the term most people might use. And it's a systemic bias. People talk about people having a racial bias, subconscious bias. Well, Wikipedia, it's not subconscious. It's there by design. It's been built into it by the moderators and the administrators in Wikipedia, who bring that to the table. Unfortunately, they bring their academic bias, they bring their political bias to the table, and primarily it's a left.
That's a
It
great
is a leftist one,
acronym.
right?
I love the acronym GASP. It's a
Gasp.
great acronym to play on the globalist, academic, secular, progressive.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's actually quite. It is used in some circles, that term.
Yeah.
So this is Larry Sanger himself, as I say. Now we'll give you an example. This is an example of the gaslighting that comes from Wikipedia into Google Gemini. I requested from Google Gemini to do basically a word chart for the term cultural Marxism, right? Now, cultural Marxism is pervasive in our society right now, but this is what comes back. I'm unable to create it because a word cloud for cultural Marxism because the term is often associated with a conspiracy theory and is used in a way that may be considered hateful and misleading. My purpose is to be helpful and harmless in generating context, blah, 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 right? So this is blatant gaslighting. Now, the reason it's coming back with this response, if we take a look at the page on Wikipedia, cultural Marxism, conspiracy theory, and it's down as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. This is kind of interesting that they're trying to protect Jews now, right? On the leftist forum, right? I thought they'd be throwing them under the bus based on the whole Palestinian thing. But no. Here we go. Culture Marxism, far right, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Now, most of the Frankfurt School people were Jewish, right? That's a fact. That's true. Most of them were not practicing Jews, however. That's another fact because they were practicing Marxists, right? They weren't practicing Jews at all. And it goes through a whole conspiracy discussion here, which is nonsense. It's just garbage, right? And we will be doing a full, thorough video on cultural Marxism and how very real it is. And this is an example of cultural Marxism in itself. Wikipedia are actually giving us an example of cultural Marxism, which attempts to gaslight and deceive you with this kind of information. So they're actually engaging in the very thing that they're saying is a conspiracy theory. So cultural Marxism isn't actually a conspiracy. It's a weapon. It's a psychological weapon, and we'll cover that in a separate video. Okay. And it can be used by anybody. It can be used by Marxists. It can be used by globalists. It can be used by anybody to achieve their aim by setting particular narratives and putting it into society, because that's what cultural Marxists do. So, okay. So this is an example. And the trouble with this is that someone here would hear the term cultural Marxism thrown out at a meeting, or somebody might say it to them and say, oh, that's only a far right conspiracy theory. It doesn't exist at all. That's not real, right? It's very real. And so many other things, unfortunately, are very real and are portrayed like this on Wikipedia. This is not the only example. There's plenty of them. If you pull up the term world government on Wikipedia, and we know that every communist and every humanist on the planet wants a one world government. It's part of their policy. We know that the United Nations and the WEF want a one world government. It's not a conspiracy theory. You can look at there was a whole forum at the United Nations last September, if you want to check up on it, which talks about this. But they say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, right? And they feed you some ridiculous story, which is a conspiracy, and that's what they portray in the article. And unfortunately, then people get fooled by that and think, oh, that's not real. It's actually a far right conspiracy theory. So this is not good.
The media has created. They've caused this. And Dr. Matthias Desmet talks about mass formation psychosis. So they've trained the general public's brain to, when they hear the word conspiracy, their brain goes switch off. They hear the word far right, switch off. Their brains are now just programmed that these little trigger words, it's like teaching a dog, sit Fido, and you get a little treat. Far right, conspiracy, all this garbage, it triggers something in the brain that's trained to just turn off. They've really pulled a blinder with creating this psychosis amongst the public.
Yeah, 100%, Janet. That's the trouble. So, and that is part of cultural Marxism to do that, right? You put out terminology like far right or conspiracy theory, and you permeate it through society. You permeate it through the media. You permeate it through education, which is happening in our schools. These terms are being used in our schools now. Kids are being taught, oh, you have to watch for misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, etc. And most of the misinformation is actually coming from the other side. And that's the reality when you start to discover it. So let's move on. So here, critical pedagogy is basically a form of teaching that introduces cultural Marxism to children in school, right? Now, they're not going to say that, of course. They're not going to admit it. They'll say it's transformative education, it's progressive education, etc. It's based on the critical theory of the Frankfurt School. Here's a book by Joe Kinchlow, who was one of the leading critical pedagogues. People will be familiar with Paulo Freire from Brazil. It's probably the one you're most familiar with. And here it talks about it, the constructed nature of social experience. Talks about the terminology. Critical pedagogy clearly reflects these dimensions of critical theory. And critical theory is the foundation of cultural Marxism. And then
And
you can
Eugene,
see that,
people, if I can just jump in, people always ask when
yeah,
we're talking, because I know you've read all the hundreds of papers and books and dug deep into this. And people say, well, this pedagogy, you know, the people just coming into it feel like it's a bit overwhelming. And how does it go from this critical pedagogy and these theories into the classroom? So we can put in the link to the whistleblower interview that I facilitated with the DCU course participant, Mary Creedon, and she talks about how this comes into the classroom and how Paulo Freire was actually referenced in some of the college courses at the universities here in Ireland, training teachers. So that helps bring it down from this theory to it's actually in the universities, it's in the classroom. So we can put the link to that whistleblower interview in as well.
yeah, absolutely. And this particular book was referenced in one of the
Mm-hmm.
research papers associated
Yeah.
with the primary curriculum. And if you look at we'll put a reference to a DCU book which talks about teaching social justice and sustainable development across the primary curriculum, and it specifically references critical theory or critical pedagogy, Paulo Freire, transformative education for activism. They want your child to be an activist, an agent for social transformation. That's what this is all about, right?
Yeah.
They basically want them to be, yeah.
In my children's school, I saw last year at a school function, and the sign is still there. My children told me there's a big sign in the school hall at a Catholic school in rural Ireland, and it says global citizenship. So if anyone wants to think, is this a conspiracy, this global citizenship? No, it's actually on the walls of the school teaching our Irish children that they are global citizens. And if anyone wants to do their own research, we put out the content. It's not a conspiracy theory, despite what mainstream and Wikipedia might tell you.
Yeah. And where is it coming from? It's coming from the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. The UNESCO, who are the education body of the United Nations, I'd call them the indoctrination body, to be honest.
Yeah.
If you look at their digital library, they have over 10,000 references to the term critical theory and multiple thousand references to critical pedagogy. And there's a reason for that, because they push it. They push it into the countries that they want everybody to teach this stuff. And they want them to teach it on what they call a whole school basis, which means it comes into every classroom, like your English class, your home economics class, whatever it is. We'll be talking about climate change or non-binary identities or whatever it is. It's savage. It's the total destruction of our education system. So that's just give you an example. That's an example of cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism seeks to infiltrate things like the media, for example, cultural production, which is education. It's the ultimate source of cultural production is education. So that's why you see this stuff here. There's a good reason for it. Okay, so and this is just giving you an example. So there's a whole video here. Andrew Gold, Heretics channel's very good channel. You were on it, Jana. He interviewed you a few months ago, and he interviews a kind of an insider talking about what's happened with Wikipedia. And it started back in 2016, 2017. Hillary Clinton was heavily involved in the corruption of Wikipedia at the time. They were trying to get at Trump. There was the whole Russiagate thing. So they were trying to push certain narratives into the mainstream. And one way of doing that is pushing it into Wikipedia, because then it gets picked up by Google and it gets picked up by the AIs. And the other thing that Wikipedia feeds off is the mainstream media. And we'll show you an example of that later on. So it also is very much the mainstream media perspective that you get in Wikipedia, the mainstream media narrative, basically what you get.
And
so again, we know.
I was told by someone on the inside who used to work in Ireland in big tech for the likes of Google, Facebook, before they left when they saw how corrupt it all was, is there's teams in Google, teams to make sure that we, the public, see certain things. And there's an entire team, I was told, dedicated to forcing the public to see what Google and the Irish establishment want us to see. And the example I was given was Conor McGregor. So an entire team in Google is focused on, according to this person who gave me this information, on showing us what they want us to see about Conor McGregor. So during the times when he was invited to the White House, when, you know, our own Taoiseach wasn't, when he was running for president, etc. So whether you agree or like Conor McGregor, that's completely irrelevant. The point was a team is dedicated, spending hundreds of thousands a year. I think the quote I was given was over 500,000 just to control what we see with one celebrity in Ireland.
Absolutely, Jana. And you'll know, and one example of that is the way that they actually take this piece of information from Wikipedia, and it's the first thing that appears in the search.
Yes.
So regardless of what the search is, you're always going to get the first paragraph from Wikipedia, which is going to be the mainstream narrative. So I recommend people take a watch of this video because it goes through a lot of detail. We're going to touch some aspects that are actually covered in that video, but there's a lot more in it. So please have a listen, and you'll see how this corruption started. And there's a financial aspect to it now. So consultancy companies are engaged in producing Wikipedia content for people. So obviously, if you were a celebrity, you're not going to have the time to fill out your Wikipedia page. So you'll pay somebody else to do it, right? So it's become big money now. It's become its own little industry of feeding information into Wikipedia. And unfortunately, part of that is feeding in the narrative, the technocratic leftist narrative that we see everywhere in our mainstream. So that's part of it. So here's the Wikipedia co-founder. He did this interview for the Daily Signal. And again, the Daily Signal is something you should be tuning into. What we say to people is that don't just go to one news source, go to multiple news sources and make sure that they're spread between the right and the left, so to speak. So you're getting two perspectives and then you can make up your own mind. So here's Larry Sanger, one of the founders. He talks about it here. He exposes the extreme bias, and he recommends, he's got these 9 theses, and this is actually on Wikipedia. So they've allowed him to put this on Wikipedia, of course, because he was a founder. It'd be kind of silly if they didn't. And he basically calls out the concerns that he has and the things that need to be done. And it's been corrupted. Like he took the first thing on that list there, decision-making by consensus. That seemed to be okay in the past, where you think you've got your main contributors to Wikipedia coming to a consensus on a particular item and saying, okay, we're going to go with that. Trouble is, if 90% of the people in the room are all hard left, the consensus is going to be hard left. And that's what's happened in Wikipedia now. So this is the issue. He talks about having competing articles so that you can actually have an article that reflects a different viewpoint on something that isn't black and white, right? And it's no harm having that. He talks about the blacklists. We're going to talk about those in a minute. The whole neutrality. It should be neutral. Fundamentally, it isn't. This thing about ignore all rules. This was allowed originally to let people put stuff in, to encourage people to create content. The trouble is it's been abused now. So you have to apply certain rules and editorial oversight. And he talks about who are the people driving Wikipedia. We need to know who are the names, what's their background. Let the public rate the articles. That you actually, you click a like button or whatever it is, and you can rate the articles. And then the whole blocking, this notion of people being indefinitely blocked and stuff like that. And then having a legislative process, putting a proper process around the creation of content on Wikipedia. So there's nothing wrong with what he's saying here. I don't think anybody should be disagreeing with these, whether you're on the left or the right. You should be happy with what he's calling out here. So he's looking for the truth. That's what he's trying to get to. So here it is. This is the reliable sources information. Now, this was introduced into Wikipedia a number of years ago. Apparently by some anonymous individual. They talk about it in the video, in that Andrew Gold video. And it's basically saying where Wikipedia is allowed to take information from and where it's not allowed to take information from. And of course, you can kind of guess what that's going to mean from a censorship perspective. So here's giving you an example of the bias between Republican and Democratic presidents and senators. And you could pretty well see Donald Trump is down there on the far left. They should probably have inverted the chart to show it the other way around. But it's quite clear that the bias is so huge. And we'll talk about Trump derangement syndrome on another video, Jana, but there's a clear case of Trump derangement syndrome here in terms of the negativity. And despite things, they won't even give him credit for anything good that he might do, or etc. No. But it's just a bias. It's just an outrageous bias. Even if Trump didn't exist, it would still be there. And And here it is, the news sources. So Fox News, right? There's a consensus. You can see it here in the little box talking about, it's in red, right? Which tells you what they feel about Fox News. That generally unreliable reporting from Fox News. Generally unreliable. Well, I disagree with that. I fundamentally disagree with that. Fox News covers articles I do not see on the mainstream, and there's nothing unreliable about them. So I'm sorry, I don't disagree. I don't agree with you, Wikipedia, but you can see the bias here. It's very clear. And of course, CNN consensus is that news broadcaster published by CNN is generally reliable, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so this just shows you, right, what you're going to get. CNN were swearing black was white. When Joe Biden's mental capacity was collapsing in front of our very eyes. And they brought people on saying, oh, no, he's absolutely as good as he's ever been. They were totally bought into that at the time. This is grossly unfair. You could see the bias there. It was ridiculous. So it's shocking. The whole issue of the poor Ukrainian girl, Irina, who got killed on the subway. CNN didn't cover that at all. All the mainstream media didn't cover that. And it was covered first by Fox News. And they were the first mainstream channel, if you want to call it that covered it. So these guys are, it's blatant. I'm sorry. Like, this should not be green. The other one should not be red. But that's not the way, of course, for the likes of Wikipedia. Oh, no. So here it is in black and white. We'll put the link to this. You can go in and look on this bias. There's a whole, it goes through all the news sources. So you can see how they rate everybody on this particular Wikipedia page. And actually, one thing we forgot to mention, Jana, was Project Syndicate. And Project Syndicate doesn't actually appear in this particular list on Wikipedia for whatever reason. We know that Project Syndicate are actually the funnel for a mainstream technocratic narrative that gets fed to over 500 media outlets in the world. And we did a separate video on that, Project Syndicate. So again, if you want to get the mainstream, if you want to get the real technocratic narrative, go to Project Syndicate and you'll see all the anti-Trump stuff, the pro-Palestine stuff, the pro-stakeholder capitalist stuff. It's all on Project Syndicate, and it's
media in
the same.
Ireland is the real problem. So we can't say that enough, that media is the virus in Ireland causing all of the problems we see today. And people need to stop trusting the likes of RTE and News Talk and all of that garbage. And there's lots of people that are very credible setting up alternative media. And, one I can mention who's very credible and does a great job with his new media channel is Eddie Hobbs with Counterpoint. And Eugene, you and I have been on with Eddie Hobbs. And it's great to see the likes of Eddie Hobbs giving people a platform who mainstream media, legacy media, we'll call them, would just call, far right or dismiss us. And Eddie Hobbs takes a very evidence-based approach, and he's not a fringe minority. I went to 2 of his monster meetings, one in Dublin and one in Cork. Not Cork, Dublin and Athlone. He also did one in Cork. And over 600, 700 people were in a room. So, that's replacing legacy media. The trust in legacy media is frozen at a flat zero.
Yeah, it is, unfortunately. And they've done it themselves. Unfortunately, they've done it themselves. So what can you do? I guess the point is that for controversial or contested issues, which is trans ideology, racism, vaccines, COVID, climate change, cultural Marxism, world government, etc., you cannot trust Wikipedia. You just can't. What you're going to get, you'll either get nothing, you'll get conspiracy theory stuff, misinformation stuff, etc., etc. You're just going to get garbage. Actually, it'll actually even feed you these stories that are conspiracy theories, but they're not what the thing really is. So you can't trust it. And it's the same for Google, and it's going to be the same for the AI platforms because they all feed off each other. You need to search out the original sources. It could be in a book, academic paper, an article, a source website, etc., wherever possible. There's a tool called Ground News, which is basically a source that tells you the bias of the different media resources. So it accumulates the CNNs and all those people, the Fox Newses, and then the independent media, and it tells you what their bias is. It tells you where they sit on the political spectrum, and it'll give you, it'll show the comparisons between them, etc., which is very, very useful. And it'll also show you what, things called blind spots, where you might miss something because, you might just listen to, right-wing media, and then you'll miss something because it's not covered there. Or if you listen to left-wing media, you wouldn't have found out about Irina Zelenska on the tube, for example, for months because it wasn't covered. So you need to use multiple sources. I think that's my message. I'm not saying just use one, use multiple. If you're just listening to RTE right now and that's all you're getting, or BBC, you're hugely blinkered in terms of information. You're just not being told about certain things. Not told at all. It's terrible, right? There's certain pieces of news you're not even going to hear. It's outrageous. So you need to do it. The mainstream media is fundamentally captured.
So they can't criticize our open border crisis, despite the fact that even in the mainstream polls, 75% of Irish people are concerned that we have an immigration problem. But mainstream has to follow all this little checklist because, they don't want the public to understand the truth on that.
Yeah, and that particular guidance comes from the United Nations Human
Yep.
Rights Commission. So that tells you enough, right? Coming from the United Nations, and again, we'll touch on that in other videos as well. So this is the ground news thing here. I don't use ground news myself personally, but I have looked into it. And if you are interested in your news and you want to get a better perspective, then it seems to be a pretty good source. A lot of people promote it, and I think something that gives you alternative viewpoints is key. Like, that's the way it is right now. A lot of people right now are just trumpeting what they hear on RTE, and that as if it was fact and true, and they're not even hearing loads of stories, and they're getting a certain perspective on the stories they are hearing, unfortunately. So that's it. Wikipedia, Jana, people need to watch out, because right now it's not reliable. Like 90% of it is pretty harmless, like for stuff that's, just pretty generic stuff, right? That's not contentious or anything like that. Then fine, go with that. And here's an interesting point. I talked about the term cultural Marxism. If you go on and use the term critical theory, which is the foundation of cultural Marxism, that's an acceptable term. So the AIs will give you a full lowdown on critical theory if you want them to do it, and it's pretty accurate. So if you want to find out about cultural Marxism, actually do a search on critical theory, because they'll give you that. Because that seems to be a less objectionable term. And the other thing you'll see, and you'll have noticed it in the response from Google Gemini, it talks about hate. And the Marxists and communists who are engaging in cultural Marxism always love to talk about hate. People are spreading hate. And usually what they mean is they're spreading the truth that they don't agree with. But it's hate, right? Because it's not in line with the narrative. And that's in those guidelines that you mentioned, Jana, regarding the United Nations and migrants, etc., refugees. They don't want to be spreading hate, and hence, we can't report on it, because if we did, we'd be spreading hate.
Yeah, and also just in our own, X is a free speech platform, or so we think, but Dublin X seems to have a government worker in there, because I was banned off X for 11 days, and it came from one tweet I sent about who in the county council asked for the Irish tricolours to be taken down, or who in the government. They said I doxed someone and posted their personal information, but it was a county council email address, not anyone's personal email. Then while I was appealing that one, I got a second violation, again related to the freedom of information request I did on, again, who is asking for the flags to be ripped down. So we will do another podcast in the next week, because I finally got a response back from Dublin City Council and the Freedom of Information Officer on who asked for those flags to come down. And they're still being very evasive about it. So, again, they feel that we're in a time in Ireland where putting our national tricolour flag up is inciting racism, hate, and violence. I just came back from 10 days working in Washington, D.C. and Maine. The stars and stripes and national flags are everywhere. That is showing love and pride for your nation, not hate or racism. But in Ireland, it's a different story. So God bless all those people putting up the tricolour at all the roundabouts and streets and lampposts. I think I'll be getting out a ladder and hanging a few myself.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, there's Wikipedia. So beware, you've been warned. And I say follow up on the links that we have in the description, because they're well worth following up on, just to educate yourself a bit better. Okay, Jana, that's it.
Yep. Perfect. Excellent. So we'll post all the links again. If I can just please urge everyone to comment your feedback, share this, and subscribe for updates, because we live in the land of the shadow ban, because this is the truth. This is not what you're going to hear on the legacy media. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.